Hey folks, I'm excited to share some stories with you today that I've written myself. Whether you're a long-time follower or just joining us, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these tales. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe if you're new here. Let's dive in, and I hope you enjoy. The dark web conspiracy that made me question reality. I've always been a curious guy. Ever since I was a kid, I was drawn to the strange and unusual. I grew up devouring stories of the paranormal, conspiracies, and the unexplained. Naturally, when I got older, this curiosity evolved into a fascination with the dark corners of the internet. I'm talking about the dark web. Yeah, that place you always hear about, but are told never to visit. Well, I decided to dive in headfirst, and it's a decision that haunts me to this day. It started innocently enough. I was browsing some forums and stumbled upon a thread discussing the most disturbing websites people had found on the dark web. Most of it was typical stuff: drug markets, hitman services, and weird porn. But one post caught my eye. It was from a user who claimed they had found something that went beyond illegal. It was something that fundamentally altered their perception of reality. They called it the mirror. Curiosity piqued. I messaged the user for more information. After some convincing, they sent me a link with a warning. You can't unsee what you're about to see. I should have listened, but I was too intrigued. I fired up my Tor browser, entered the link, and waited. The site loaded slowly, revealing a simple, unassuming homepage with a single button that said, "Enter." I clicked it. The screen went black for a moment before displaying a live feed from what looked like a security camera. The camera was positioned in a small, dingy room with a single chair in the center. The room was dimly lit, with shadows dancing around the edges. I watched, waiting for something to happen, but for several minutes, nothing did. Just as I was about to close the window, a man entered the room. He was tall, gaunt, and wore a dirty lab coat. He walked over to the chair, and that's when I noticed something odd. His movements were jerky, almost robotic. He stood next to the chair, staring directly into the camera. His eyes were void of any emotion, dark and empty. Then he smiled. It was a smile that sent chills down my spine. Unnatural, almost inhuman. The man stepped out of the frame, and a moment later, he returned, dragging a woman by her hair. She was screaming, her face a mask of terror. He threw her onto the chair and strapped her down. The camera zoomed in, focusing on her face. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she was mumbling something I couldn't make out. Then the man began to speak. His voice was distorted, like it was being run through some kind of filter. "Welcome to the mirror," he said. "Today, we will explore the boundaries of human perception." He pulled out a syringe filled with a glowing blue liquid. The woman's screams intensified as he injected her with the substance. Almost immediately, her body began to convulse. Her eyes rolled back, and foam started to drip from her mouth. The man just stood there, watching with that same eerie smile. What happened next was beyond disturbing. Her skin started to blister and melt, like she was being burned from the inside out. The convulsions grew more violent, and I could hear her bones cracking. But the most horrifying part was her eyes. They changed, turning completely black, and then she looked at the camera, not just in the direction of the camera, but directly into it, as if she could see me watching. The man began to laugh, a high-pitched, manic sound that echoed through my speakers. "Behold, the true nature of reality," he said. The woman's body continued to disintegrate, her flesh peeling away to reveal something underneath. Something that looked like it was made of pure darkness, writhing and pulsating as if it were alive. I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed my laptop shut, my heart pounding in my chest, but the images were burned into my mind. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her black eyes staring into my soul. The next day, I tried to forget what I'd seen. I went to work, tried to focus on my tasks, but everything felt off. People around me seemed different, like they were wearing masks. I started to notice little things, strange glances, whispered conversations, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. I needed answers, so I went back to the forum and messaged the user who had given me the link. No response. I checked his profile, but it was gone, like he had never existed. Desperate, I posted a new thread, asking if anyone knew about the mirror. Most people dismissed it as a hoax, but one reply stood out. It was from a user named Watcher22. They said they had seen it too, and that there was more to the story. I contacted Watcher22, and after some back and forth, they agreed to meet in person. We chose a busy cafe, thinking it would be safer. When I arrived, I spotted them immediately. They looked haggard, like they hadn't slept in days. As soon as I sat down, they leaned in and whispered, "You shouldn't have watched it. They know." Before I could ask what they meant, they handed me a piece of paper with an address and a time, midnight tonight. "If you want to know the truth, be there," they said, and then they got up and left. Glancing nervously around as they did, I sat there, staring at the address. Every rational part of me was screaming to forget this whole thing, but I needed to know. I needed to understand what I had seen and why it was affecting me so deeply. So that night, I found myself driving to the address, a run-down warehouse on the outskirts of the town. The place was abandoned, covered in graffiti and broken windows. I parked a little distance away and walked the rest of the way, my footsteps echoing in the silent night. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel my heart racing. As I approached the warehouse, I saw a figure standing by the entrance. It was Watcher22. "You came," they said. "Good. Follow me." They led me inside, through a maze of corridors and rooms, until we reached a large open space with a single table in the center. On the table was a laptop. Watcher22 gestured for me to sit. "This is where it all began," they said, opening the laptop and bringing up a video file. "Watch." I hesitated, but then pressed to play. The video started with the same room I had seen before, but this time it was empty. Then the screen went black and words appeared. "You have seen beyond the veil. Now you must understand." The video cut to a series of images, distorted faces, symbols, and strange landscapes that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Each image flashed by quickly, but they were seared into my brain. Finally, the video ended with a single phrase: "Welcome to the truth." I looked at Watcher22, my mind reeling. "What does this mean?" I asked. "It means," they said, "that everything you know is a lie. The mirror shows you the reality behind our world. The darkness you saw, it's real, and it's coming for us." Before I could respond, there was a loud crash. The door burst open, and several figures in black suits stormed in. Watcher22 tried to run, but they were tackled to the ground. I was grabbed and dragged out of the warehouse, a bag thrown over my head. I don't remember much after that. I woke up in my apartment, everything seemingly normal, but I knew it wasn't. My phone was wiped, my computer gone, and a note on my desk read, "Stop looking, or you'll disappear too." I don't know who they are or how they're connected to the mirror, but I'm terrified. Everywhere I go, I feel like I'm being watched. Every person I meet, I wonder if they're part of it. I've tried to move on, but the images haunt me. The woman's face, her black eyes, they're always there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. This is my warning to you. Don't go looking for the mirror. Some truths are better left hidden. Life after that night at the warehouse was a nightmare. I tried to resume my normal routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. My days were filled with paranoia and fear, my nights haunted by those horrific images. The woman's black eyes seemed to follow me everywhere. I stopped sleeping, afraid of what I might see if I closed my eyes. One evening, about a week after the incident, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You're not alone." Inside was a single line of text. "Meet me at the park, midnight." Attached was a photo of the same park I walked through every day on my way to work. I should have ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed answers. I arrived at the park a little before midnight, my heart pounding. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the breeze. I walked to the spot in the photo, a bench near the center of the park, and waited. Minutes felt like hours, and just when I was about to leave, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was an older man, maybe in his 50s, with graying hair and a stern expression. He walked over and sat down next to me. "You're in deep," he said without preamble, "but there's a way out." I looked at him, confused and wary. "Who are you?" I asked. "Call me Jack," he replied. "I used to work for them, the people behind the mirror." My heart skipped a beat. "You know about the mirror?" He nodded. "More than you can imagine. It's not just a website. It's a gateway to something beyond our understanding. The people who run it are part of an ancient cult, worshipping entities that exist outside our reality. They believe that by spreading the truth, they can prepare humanity for the coming darkness." I shivered, the pieces starting to fall into place. "What do they want from me?" "They want you to be a messenger," Jack said, "to spread the word, to bring others into their fold. But there's a catch. Once you've seen the mirror, you're marked. They can find you, no matter where you go." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So, what do I do?" Jack glanced around, making sure we weren't being watched. "You need to disappear. Completely. There's a group, a resistance of sorts, that's been fighting them for years. They can help you, but it won't be easy. You'll have to give up everything, your name, your life, everything you know." The thought of leaving everything behind was terrifying, but so was the idea of living in constant fear. "How do I find them?" I asked. He handed me a small, crumpled piece of paper. "This is a contact. Go to this address and tell them Jack sent you. They'll know what to do." Before I could ask anything else, Jack stood up. "Good luck," he said, and then he was gone, melting back into the shadows. I stared at the paper in my hand, feeling a mix of fear and determination. I had no other choice. I went home, packed a bag with a few essentials, and left a note for my family, telling them not to look for me. Then I headed to the address Jack had given me. It was an old, run-down building on the outskirts of the city, one that looked like it hadn't seen a tenant in decades. I hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. It creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. A man appeared, his face obscured by shadows. "You Jack's friend?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, he said you could help me." The man stepped aside, letting me in. "Follow me." He led me through a series of narrow corridors until we reached a room filled with old computer equipment and surveillance monitors. A few people were huddled around, talking in hushed tones. The man motioned for me to sit. "I'm Alex," he said. "Jack told us you'd be coming. We're the Resistance." I looked around, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. "What is this place?" I asked. "It's our headquarters," Alex replied. "We're a small group, but we've been fighting the cult for years. We've lost a lot of good people, but we've also saved many. We can help you disappear, give you a new identity, but it's a dangerous road. Once you're in, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath. "I don't have a choice. I need to escape them." Alex nodded. "All right. We'll start by erasing your digital footprint. No social media, no bank accounts, nothing that can trace back to you. Then we'll move you to a safe house. From there, we'll figure out our next steps." The next few days were a blur of activity. The Resistance worked tirelessly to wipe my existence from the internet, creating a new identity for me. They gave me a new name, new documents, and a new story. I was no longer the person I had been. I was someone else entirely. But the nightmares didn't stop. Every night, I dreamed of the woman with the black eyes, her face twisted in agony. I saw Jack's warning in my sleep, the cult's symbols flashing before my eyes. I knew I was marked, and I knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. One night, I woke up to a noise outside my window. I crept to the edge and peeked out, my heart pounding. There, in the shadows, I saw them, figures in black suits, the same ones who had taken me from the warehouse. They were searching for me. I knew I didn't have much time. I grabbed my bag and snuck out the back, slipping into the darkness. I made my way to the nearest safe house, praying they wouldn't find me. As I ran, I could feel their presence, an invisible force closing in on me. My mind raced with thoughts of what they would do if they caught me. Would they kill me? Or worse, make me one of them? When I reached the safe house, Alex and the others were waiting. "They're here," I gasped. "They found me." Alex cursed under his breath. "We need to move, now. They won't stop until they have you." We packed up quickly, leaving behind everything we couldn't carry. As we drove away, I looked back at the place that had become my sanctuary, knowing I'd never see it again. We drove through the night, changing cars and routes to throw them off our trail. Eventually, we reached a remote cabin in the woods. It was isolated, far from any towns or cities. Alex assured me it was safe, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they would find me, no matter where I went. Over the next few weeks, I tried to adjust to my new life, but the fear never left. I knew the cult was still out there, and I knew they wouldn't stop until they had me. The Resistance did their best to protect me, but I could see the strain it was putting on them. Every day was a battle, a fight to stay one step ahead. One night, as I sat alone in the cabin, I received another anonymous email. It was a video file, and my heart sank as I opened it. The video showed Jack tied to a chair, bruised and bloody. He looked up at the camera, his eyes filled with pain. "They found me," he whispered. "I'm sorry." The screen went black, and then the words appeared. "You can't escape us." I knew then that my fight was far from over. The cult was relentless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But I wasn't going to give up. I was going to find a way to stop them, to end their reign of terror once and for all. This is just the beginning of my story. If you're reading this, be careful. The mirror is real, and the truth is out there, lurking in the shadows. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't look for it, because once you see it, there's no going back. Living in the cabin felt like being in a prison made of my own fear. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside sent my heart racing. I couldn't trust anyone, not even the resistance members who had taken me in. They were good people, but I knew that the cult could infiltrate anywhere, twist anyone to their cause. Paranoia became my constant companion. One afternoon, Alex called a meeting. The cabin was quiet, the air thick with tension. "We've received intel," he said, looking around at the group. "The cult is ramping up their efforts. They're not just looking for you, but for anyone connected to the mirror." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we need to go on the offensive," Alex replied, his expression grim. "We can't just keep running. We need to find a way to shut them down." The room buzzed with murmurs of agreement. Despite my fear, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe we could end this nightmare. Alex laid out a plan. We'd infiltrate one of the cult's known meeting spots, gather information, and use it to dismantle their operations. It sounded simple, but I knew it was anything but. The cult was powerful and well-connected. They wouldn't go down easily. Still, I agreed to help. I couldn't keep living in fear. I needed to take action. We spent the next few days preparing. Alex taught me how to handle a gun, something I never thought I'd need to learn. The others showed me how to blend in, to move without attracting attention. It was intense, but I was determined. The night of the operation, we drove to an abandoned factory on the outskirts of a nearby city. According to our intel, the cult used it for their rituals. We parked a safe distance away and made our way through the darkness, hearts pounding. The factory loomed ahead, its broken windows and crumbling walls casting eerie shadows. We approached cautiously, slipping inside through a side entrance. The place was dark and smelled of decay. We moved silently, avoiding the broken glass and debris on the floor. In the distance, we heard chanting. We followed the sound, hearts in our throats. As we neared the main hall, we saw them. A group of people in black robes stood in a circle, candles flickering around them. At the center was an altar, and on it lay a young woman, unconscious or dead. I couldn't tell. My blood ran cold. The scene was like something out of a nightmare. The leader, a tall figure in a dark robe, held up a knife, chanting in a language I didn't understand. I felt Alex's hand on my shoulder, pulling me back. "We need to get closer," he whispered. "We need to see what they're doing." We moved to a better vantage point, hiding behind a stack of old crates. The leader began to speak in English, his voice echoing through the hall. "Tonight, we offer a sacrifice to the darkness beyond. May it grant us power and protect us from those who seek to destroy us." As the knife descended, I couldn't watch. I turned away, feeling sick, but Alex nudged me, his eyes wide. "Look," he whispered. I forced myself to watch. The woman on the altar began to convulse, her body writhing as if possessed. Her eyes snapped open, black as night, just like the woman I'd seen in the mirror. She screamed, a sound that cut through me like a knife, and then she was gone, disappeared into thin air. Cult members began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. We stayed hidden, waiting until the last of them had left. When it was finally silent, we crept out of our hiding place and approached the altar. The air was thick with an unnatural energy, and I felt like I could barely breathe. Alex examined the altar, taking photos with a small camera. "This is it," he said, his voice trembling. "This is the proof we need." Suddenly, a door slammed open, and we were surrounded. Cult members emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden behind masks. I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder, dragging me backward. Alex tried to fight, but there were too many of them. We were hauled into a small room and thrown to the floor. The leader stood above us, his eyes cold and calculating. "You thought you could stop us?" he sneered. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." They tied us to chairs, their grip bruisingly tight. The leader paced in front of us, his expression one of smug satisfaction. "You've seen too much," he said, "but it doesn't matter. Soon you'll be just like her." He gestured to a screen in the corner of the room. It flickered to life, showing the same room I had seen, in the mirror, the same chair, the same dim light. A man in a lab coat entered the frame, dragging another person behind him. My heart stopped when I realized it was Jack. He was barely conscious, bloodied and beaten. The man in the lab coat strapped him to the chair and injected him with the same glowing blue liquid. I watched in horror as Jack's body convulsed, his skin blistering and melting away. His eyes turned black, and he looked directly into the camera. "Welcome to reality," the leader said, his voice dripping with malice. "Soon you'll join him." I struggled against my bonds, but it was no use. The cult members left the room, leaving us alone with the horrific images on the screen. I turned to Alex, desperation in my eyes. "We need to get out of here," he nodded, determination hardening his features. "We will. I promise." Hours passed, the images on the screen playing over and over, a relentless assault on our sanity. Finally, we heard footsteps. The door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. It was one of the resistance members, a woman named Sarah. "Thank God," Alex breathed. "How did you find us?" "We've been tracking you," she said, cutting our bonds. "We need to move now." We hurried out of the building, keeping to the shadows. As we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The cult was relentless, and I knew this was far from over. We made it back to the safe house, but the atmosphere had changed. We were no longer on the defensive. We were hunting them now. The resistance had grown, new members joining our cause every day. We were ready to fight back, to expose the cult and their horrifying rituals. But deep down, I knew the real battle was just beginning. The mirror had shown me the darkness that lay beyond our reality, and I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't escape it. The cult would come for us, and when they did, we'd be ready. This war wasn't just about survival. It was about uncovering the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. If you're reading this, know that the fight isn't over. The mirror is real, and so is the darkness it reveals. We won't stop until we've brought it all to light, or until it consumes us completely. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and planning. The resistance had grown more organized, more determined. We knew we had to strike a decisive blow against the cult, to dismantle their operations and expose them to the world. But we also knew it wouldn't be easy. They were powerful, with resources and connections we could only imagine. Sarah, Alex, and I spent countless hours poring over the intel we had gathered. Maps, documents, and photographs covered every surface of our makeshift command center. We had identified several key locations, warehouses, abandoned buildings, even a few seemingly ordinary homes that we believed were part of the cult's network. One night, as we were finalizing our plans, we received an unexpected visitor. A man, disheveled and clearly terrified, stumbled into our safe house. He claimed to have escaped from one of the cult's facilities. His name was Tom, and his story was harrowing. "They're experimenting on people," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know what they're trying to achieve, but it's horrific. They're injecting them with some kind of substance, and it changes them. I saw things that shouldn't be possible." He showed us a scar on his arm, a reminder of the torment he had endured. "I managed to escape, but they'll come for me. They always do." We took him in, gave him a place to rest, and listened to everything he had to say. His information was invaluable, giving us a clearer picture of the cult's activities, but it also confirmed our worst fears. They were closer to achieving their goal than we had thought. With this new intel, we decided it was time to act. We couldn't wait any longer. Our target was one of their main facilities, a large, secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city. According to Tom, this was where they conducted their most secret and dangerous experiments. The night of the operation, we geared up and moved out. Our team was small but determined, each of us ready to do whatever it took to stop the cult. As we approached the mansion, I felt a mix of fear and resolve. We were walking into the lion's den, but we had no choice. We split into two groups. Alex and Sarah led one team around to the back, while I took the front with Tom and a few others. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows dark and foreboding. We moved silently, slipping through the shadows until we reached the entrance. Tom led us to a side door, hidden from view. He picked the lock with practiced ease, and we slipped inside. The interior was eerily quiet, the air thick with a sense of dread. We moved through the hallways, careful to avoid detection. As we neared the basement, the sounds of chanting reached our ears. My heart pounded in my chest. We were close. We descended the stairs, the chanting growing louder with each step. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a large, dimly lit room. The sight that greeted us was beyond anything I had imagined. The room was filled with people, all dressed in the cult's signature black robes. In the center stood an altar, similar to the one we had seen in the factory. But this time, the person on the altar was conscious, struggling against their restraints. The leader, the same one we had encountered before, stood over them, holding the syringe filled with the glowing blue liquid. He looked up as we entered, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing through the room. "I've been expecting you." Chaos erupted. Our team sprang into action, engaging the cult members in a desperate fight. I saw Alex and Sarah fighting their way through the crowd, determined to reach the altar. I pushed forward, my mind focused on one thing: stopping the leader. As I fought my way through, I saw Tom fall, a cult member's knife plunging into his side. I shouted in rage, firing my weapon at his attacker. Tom's eyes met mine, a mixture of pain and gratitude, before he collapsed. I reached the altar just as the leader was about to inject the victim. I tackled him, the syringe clattering to the floor. We struggled, his strength surprising me. He managed to knock me back, and I stumbled, catching myself just in time to see him grab the syringe. "No more," I growled, charging at him again. This time, I was ready. I knocked the syringe from his hand and landed a punch square on his jaw. He fell back, dazed. I grabbed the syringe and smashed it against the floor, the glowing liquid spilling out. The leader laughed, a chilling sound. "You think this will stop us? You're too late. The process has already begun." Before I could respond, he lunged at me. We fought, the room spinning around us. I could hear the sounds of battle, the shouts and cries of my friends and enemies, but all that mattered was stopping him. Finally, I managed to gain the upper hand. I grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor and drove it into his side. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock. "This isn't over," he hissed, blood bubbling from his mouth. "The darkness is coming, and you can't stop it." He collapsed, his body twitching before going still. I stood over him, breathing heavily. The room was silent. The cult members, either dead or captured. Alex and Sarah approached, their faces grim but determined. "We did it," Alex said, looking around. "We stopped them." But I wasn't so sure. The leader's words echoed in my mind. The darkness is coming. What did he mean? And what had we truly achieved? We freed the victim on the altar, a young woman named Emily. She was weak but alive, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved me." As we made our way out of the mansion, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. We had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The cult was still out there, and the darkness they worshipped was real. Back at the safe house, we regrouped, tending to our wounds and mourning our losses. Tom was gone, but his sacrifice had given us the chance to strike a significant blow against the cult. We honored his memory, vowing to continue the fight. The days turned into weeks, and we continued to gather intel, preparing for the next phase of our mission. The nightmares still haunted me, but I had learned to live with them. The woman with the black eyes, the leader's twisted smile, they were always there, lurking in the corners of my mind. One night, as I was reviewing some documents, I found a clue. It was a reference to an old manuscript, said to contain information about the cult and their rituals. If we could find it, it might give us the edge we needed. I shared the discovery with Alex and Sarah, and we made plans to locate the manuscript. It was said to be hidden in an ancient library, long forgotten, and buried under the ruins of an old monastery. The journey would be dangerous, but we were ready. We had come this far, and there was no turning back. The cult had to be stopped, and we were the only ones who could do it. As we prepared to set out, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The leader's words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the darkness that awaited us. But we were determined. We would find the manuscript, uncover the cult's secrets, and end their reign of terror once and for all. This was our mission, our purpose, and we wouldn't stop until it was done. The old monastery was a desolate place, crumbling and overgrown with vegetation. The ruins stood as a testament to a time long forgotten, shrouded in mist and mystery. We had traveled for days, navigating through dense forests and treacherous paths, determined to reach our destination. The manuscript, if it existed, was our last hope. We arrived at the monastery just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ancient stone walls. Alex, Sarah, and I moved cautiously, aware that the cult could be watching. The place was eerily silent, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the wind. We made our way to the entrance, a large wooden door that creaked ominously as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was cold and damp, filled with the scent of decay. We lit our flashlights and proceeded down the main hall, the beam cutting through the darkness. The library was located deep within the monastery, hidden behind a series of secret passages. It took us hours to navigate the labyrinthine corridors, each turn and dead end sapping our energy. But we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the manuscript could hold the key to defeating the cult. Finally, we found it. A massive wooden door adorned with intricate carvings. Alex pushed it open, revealing a vast room filled with rows upon rows of ancient books and scrolls. Dust motes danced in the beam of our flashlights as we stepped inside, the weight of history pressing down on us. We split up, each of us searching a different section of the library. It was slow work, sifting through the centuries-old tomes, but we were determined. Hours passed, the silence only broken by the occasional sound of pages turning. Then Sarah called out, "I think I found something." We rushed over to her, our hearts pounding. She held up a large leather-bound book, its cover marked with strange symbols. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. The manuscript. We gathered around a table and opened the book. The pages were filled with detailed illustrations and cryptic text, but as we read, a picture began to emerge. The manuscript spoke of ancient rituals and dark entities, of a veil between worlds that the cult sought to tear open. It described the substance they used, a concoction designed to bridge the gap between our reality and the darkness beyond. As we pored over the text, we realized the full extent of the cult's plans. They believed that by merging our world with the realm of darkness, they could gain unimaginable power. The sacrifices, the experiments, it was all part of their twisted goal. But the manuscript also contained a glimmer of hope. It spoke of a way to reverse the process, to seal the veil and trap the darkness on the other side. It required a ritual of our own, using specific elements to counteract the cult's work. We gathered the necessary items, many of which were already in the monastery. The ritual had to be performed at the heart of the cult's operations, where the veil was weakest. We knew it would be dangerous, but we had no choice. This was our chance to stop them once and for all. We left the monastery under cover of darkness, heading towards the cult's main headquarters, a sprawling estate deep in the countryside. As we approached, we could see figures moving in the shadows, cult members patrolling the grounds. We moved silently, slipping past their defenses and making our way inside. The interior of the estate was as opulent as it was sinister. Dark tapestries lined the walls, and strange symbols were carved into the stone floors. We followed the instructions in the manuscript, navigating through the maze-like hallways until we reached the central chamber. The room was large and circular, with an altar in the center. The air was thick with a palpable sense of dread, and I could feel the darkness pressing in around us. We began setting up the ritual, placing the items in a precise pattern on the floor. As we worked, the door burst open, and cult members flooded into the room. The leader, his face twisted with rage, strode towards us. "You can't stop us," he snarled. "The darkness will consume you all." We fought desperately, holding them off as Alex and Sarah continued the ritual. The leader and I clashed, his strength almost inhuman, but I was fueled by determination. by the knowledge that this was our only chance. I managed to land a blow that sent him sprawling, buying us a few precious moments. "Now!" Alex shouted. We joined hands, reciting the words from the manuscript. The air around us crackled with energy, and the room began to shake. A bright light emanated from the symbols on the floor, growing brighter and brighter until it was blinding. The cult members screamed, clutching their heads as the light intensified. The leader tried to stop us, but it was too late. The light exploded outward, filling the room with a searing brilliance. The darkness writhed and screamed, fighting against the power of the ritual. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, and the room fell silent. The cult members lay unconscious or dead, their twisted plans thwarted. The leader was gone, his body disintegrated by the power of the ritual. We stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what we had accomplished slowly sinking in. We had done it. We had stopped the cult and sealed the veil. In the days that followed, we dismantled the cult's remaining operations, freeing their captives and destroying their facilities. The resistance grew stronger, our ranks swelling with those who had been saved or inspired by our actions. But the fight wasn't over. We knew that the darkness was still out there, lurking beyond the veil. The mirror was still a threat, and there would always be those drawn to its power. But we were ready. We had faced the darkness and survived, and we would continue to fight, to protect our world from the horrors that lay beyond. As for me, the nightmares still came, but they were tempered by a sense of purpose. I had found a new family in the resistance, a group of people who understood the darkness and were willing to stand against it. Together, we would continue the fight, shining a light into the shadows and keeping the darkness at bay. This is my story, a testament to the horrors we faced and the strength we found within ourselves. If you ever find yourself drawn to the dark corners of the internet, remember this: some truths are better left hidden. The mirror is real, and so is the darkness it reveals. But as long as we stand together, we can face it and we can overcome it. I found a digital diary of a serial killer on the dark web. So, I've always had this morbid curiosity. It's a weird thing to admit, but the dark web fascinated me. All the stories, the urban legends, the rumors, they drew me in like a moth to a flame. I wasn't a hacker or anything, just a regular guy with too much free time and a curiosity that often got the better of me. I thought I'd seen everything the regular internet had to offer. The dark web felt like the final frontier. A few months ago, I decided to dive in. I took all the necessary precautions: VPN, Tor browser, the whole shebang. It was like setting up for some kind of twisted treasure hunt. At first, it was mostly boring stuff: hidden marketplaces, questionable forums, but nothing that really caught my attention. I was almost ready to give up, thinking the dark web was just overhyped. But then I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. It was a link buried deep in a forum thread, the kind of link that screamed danger. The text read, "For those with a strong stomach and a curious mind." I hesitated, but curiosity won out. I clicked on it, and it took me to a plain black web page with a single download button labeled The Diary. It was a zip file, about 300 MB. My heart pounded as I downloaded it, the room suddenly feeling colder. When the download finished, I unzipped the file and found a folder full of text documents. Each one was labeled by date, spanning several years. I opened the first file, dated January 1st, 2015. The first few lines made my stomach churn. It was a diary, but not just any diary. It was the diary of a serial killer. The entries were detailed, disturbingly so. They didn't just describe the killings. They captured every twisted thought, every sickening thrill this person felt. It was like peering into the darkest recesses of a human mind. January 1st, 2015. New year, new beginnings. She was perfect, alone, vulnerable, like a lamb to the slaughter. I watched her for days, learned her routine, waited for the perfect moment. The anticipation was intoxicating. When I finally grabbed her, the look of terror in her eyes was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I took my time, savoring every scream, every plea. She begged for mercy, but mercy is a luxury I don't afford. When it was over, I felt alive, more alive than I've ever felt. This is my calling. This is what I was meant to do. I felt sick, but I couldn't stop reading. Each entry was more disturbing than the last, detailing the killer's escalating depravity. They were meticulous, methodical, taking perverse pleasure in the suffering of their victims. They wrote about the preparations, the hunt, the capture, and finally, the kill. Each step was documented with chilling precision. April 14th, 2015. This one was special. She reminded me of my mother. The same defiance, the same fire in her eyes. It was almost a shame to extinguish it. Almost. I took her to the basement, the one I've soundproofed. No one could hear her screams. I played with her, taunted her, broke her spirit before I broke her body. It took hours, but every second was worth it. In the end, she was just another body, another memory to savor. But for those hours, she was mine. And that's all that matters. The details were graphic, too graphic. I won't write everything here because it's just too much. But imagine the worst horror movie you've ever seen and multiply it by 10. That's what this diary was like. The killer wasn't just documenting their crimes. They were reveling in them, getting off on the power and control they had over their victims. I thought about going to the police, but I hesitated. There was something about the diary that felt unfinished. The last entry was dated December 31st, 2019, almost a year ago. Had they stopped? Were they caught? Or were they still out there hunting their next victim? I needed to know more. I couldn't just walk away from this. It was like the diary had a hold on me, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I spent hours reading through the entries, losing track of time. Each one was a window into a nightmare, a glimpse into a world I never knew existed. I started to see patterns, connections, hints at the killer's identity. They were careful, but not infallible. There were clues if you knew where to look. And then I found it. A name. Just a first name. But it was enough. It was buried in an entry from 2018. A slip of the tongue. A moment of carelessness. The killer had mentioned someone they knew. Someone named David. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I had to find out who this David was. Maybe he was the killer. Or maybe he knew the killer. Either way, it was the first real lead I had. I don't know what I'm getting myself into, but I can't stop now. I need to know the truth, no matter how dark and twisted it is. I have to keep reading, keep digging. This diary is a Pandora's box, and I've already opened it. There's no going back now. So after finding the name David, I was hooked. It was like the diary had taken on a life of its own, demanding to be read, to be understood. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything else. I had to know who David was and how he fit into this twisted puzzle. I started doing some digging, using every tool at my disposal. I trawled through social media, public records, anything that might give me a lead. It wasn't easy, but after a few days, I found him. David Klein. He lived in a small town about 3 hours from where I was. It felt surreal, putting a name and face to the darkness I'd been reading about. He seemed so normal, a family man, active in the community, the kind of guy you'd never suspect. But I knew better. I debated what to do next. Going to the police still felt premature. I needed more evidence, something concrete. I decided to take a drive out to David's town, see if I could learn more. It was risky, I knew that, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was onto something big. When I got to the town, it was like stepping into a different world. Everything was so ordinary. Kids playing in the streets, people going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the darkness lurking beneath the surface. I parked my car a few blocks away from David's house and started walking, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. David's house was a modest 2-story place with a neatly kept yard. Nothing about it screamed serial killer, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach as I approached. I needed to get inside, see if I could find anything that connected him to the diary. But how? Breaking in was out of the question. Too risky. Too many variables. I decided to try a different approach. I waited until nightfall, then walked around the neighborhood, looking for an opportunity. Luck was on my side. Around 10 p.m., David's house went dark. I saw him leave, getting into his car and driving off. I waited another 10 minutes, just to be sure, then made my move. I crept up to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door was locked, as I expected, but a window around the back was open just a crack. I managed to pry it open and slip inside. The house was eerily quiet, every creak of the floorboards echoing in the silence. I moved quickly, searching for anything that might link David to the diary. In the basement, I found it. A locked door. It was heavy, reinforced, not something you'd expect to find in a regular house. I searched the room for the key, my hands shaking. Finally, I found it hidden in a drawer. A small rusted thing that fit the lock perfectly. I turned the key, and the door creaked open. The smell hit me first, a sickly sweet stench that made my stomach turn. I fumbled for a light switch and found one on the wall. The basement lit up, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. There were tools, instruments of torture, and bloodstains on the floor. Pictures lined the walls, photos of the victims in various stages of suffering. It was all there, everything I'd read about in the diary, laid out in horrifying detail. I took out my phone, snapping pictures of everything. This was it, the proof I needed. I was about to leave when I heard a noise upstairs. Footsteps. My heart skipped a beat. David was back. I panicked, looking for a place to hide. I slipped into a small closet in the basement, closing the door just as the basement door opened. I could hear David's footsteps, slow and deliberate, as he walked down the stairs. He was humming to himself, a low, eerie tune that sent chills down my spine. He walked around the basement, muttering to himself. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. After what felt like an eternity, he finally went back upstairs. I waited another 10 minutes before slipping out of the closet. and making my way back to the window. I climbed out, my heart racing, and ran back to my car. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with what I'd seen. This was real. David Klein was the killer, and I had the proof. But what now? I knew I couldn't go back to his house. It was too dangerous. I had to figure out my next move. And fast. I spent the next few days laying low, trying to decide what to do. I had the pictures, but would they be enough? I needed to be sure. I went back to the diary, reading through the entries again, looking for anything I might have missed. And then I found it. Another name. This time, it was clearer. A last name slipped into an entry from 2017. My old friend Johnson would have loved this one. Johnson, another lead, another piece of the puzzle. I don't know where this is going to end, but I have to keep going. I have to see this through. The darkness I've uncovered is like a black hole, pulling me in deeper and deeper. I can't escape it now. I can only hope I find the answers before it's too late. After the close call at David's house, I was on edge. My brain was in overdrive, constantly churning over the details I'd uncovered. I was obsessed, and I knew it. Every day felt like a balancing act between my regular life and this dark, hidden investigation. I was treading dangerous waters, and part of me loved it. The name Johnson kept echoing in my mind. It was my next lead, the next thread to pull. I started searching through public records, social media, anything that might give me a hint about who this Johnson was. It took a while, but I finally found him. Matthew Johnson. He was an old classmate of David's, and they still lived relatively close to each other. The deeper I dug, the more connections I found between them. Shared friends, old photos, even a few mentions on each other's social media accounts. Matthew Johnson was a loner. He lived in a rundown house on the outskirts of town, a far cry from David's well-kept home. I decided to pay him a visit, but I knew I had to be careful. My encounter with David had taught me that these guys weren't just twisted, they were smart and very dangerous. I waited until nightfall again, making the now familiar drive out of town. Johnson's house was even more foreboding in person. It was dilapidated, with overgrown weeds and a general air of neglect. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. I circled the house, looking for a way in. Most of the windows were boarded up, but I found a small basement window that wasn't. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to slip through. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. I flicked on my flashlight and started searching. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. In the corner of the basement was a small desk covered in papers and photographs. As I got closer, I realized they were the same kind of photos I'd seen in David's basement. Victims, bound and terrified, caught in their final moments of agony. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep looking. Among the papers, I found a journal. It wasn't as detailed as the digital diary, but it was enough. Matthew Johnson had documented his involvement in the killings, often referring to David by name. They were partners in this sick game, each feeding off the other's depravity. Johnson's entries were shorter, more sporadic, but just as disturbing. March 3rd, 2017. David's got another one. This time, it's a young guy, barely 20. He's got that fire in his eyes, the kind that makes the game so much more fun. We took him to the cabin, the one in the woods. No one goes there. No one hears anything. David did most of the work, but I had my fun too. The kid begged for his life, but mercy is for the weak. We're gods in that place, and gods don't show mercy. Reading those words made my skin crawl. These men were monsters, and they were hiding in plain sight. I took pictures of everything, making sure I had a record. I was about to leave when I heard a noise above me, the sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate. Someone was home. Panic surged through me, but I tried to stay calm. I turned off my flashlight and crouched behind a pile of boxes, praying I wouldn't be found. The footsteps grew louder, and then I heard the basement door creak open. Light spilled down the stairs, and I held my breath. Johnson's voice echoed through the basement, low and menacing. "I know you're down here. You think you can hide from me?" I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I heard him moving around, searching. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. Then just as he was about to reach my hiding spot, a loud crash came from upstairs. Johnson froze, then cursed under his breath, and ran back up the stairs. I didn't wait to see what had happened. I bolted from my hiding spot, scrambling out the basement window and running as fast as I could back to my car. I didn't stop until I was miles away, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Back home, I tried to process everything. I had enough evidence now, more than enough. I had to go to the police, but I needed to be smart about it. I compiled everything, the photos, the journal entries, the digital diary, and made copies. I wasn't going to take any chances. The next morning, I went to the police station. I asked to speak with a detective, telling them I had information about a series of murders. They were skeptical at first, but when I showed them the evidence, their expressions changed. They took me seriously, bringing me into a private room and asking me to go over everything in detail. It took hours, but I told them everything about the dark web, the diary, David Klein, and Matthew Johnson. They asked a lot of questions, taking notes and examining the evidence. By the end of it, they assured me they would investigate, but I could tell they were still processing the sheer horror of what I'd uncovered. I went home feeling a mix of relief and dread. I'd done what I could, but there was still a part of me that felt exposed, vulnerable. These men were out there, and they knew someone was onto them. I didn't know what they would do if they found out it was me. That night, I barely slept. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. I kept my phone close, half expecting a call from the police, or worse, a visit from David or Johnson. But the night passed without incident, and in the morning, I forced myself to go about my day as normally as possible. It was a few days later when I got the call. The police had raided both David and Johnson's houses. They found everything: the photos, the journals, the tools. David had been arrested without incident, but Johnson had put up a fight. He was shot dead when he tried to attack an officer. I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that it was over, horror at everything I'd uncovered, and a lingering fear that I might never truly be free of the darkness I delved into. The diary had opened a door to a world I never knew existed, and even with David and Johnson gone, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more out there, more monsters hiding in plain sight. I don't know if I'll ever fully recover from this. The images, the words, the knowledge, they haunt me, but I'm trying to move on, to find some semblance of normalcy. I just hope that sharing my story helps someone out there stay safe. And remember, curiosity can be dangerous. Sometimes it's better to leave the darkness alone. Life slowly started to return to some semblance of normal after the arrests. The police kept me updated on the investigation, and while the horror of what I'd discovered stayed with me, knowing David was behind bars and Johnson was dead brought a small measure of peace. For a few weeks, I even managed to sleep through the night. Then the email started. At first, I thought they were spam, strange cryptic messages that landed in my inbox from anonymous addresses. But as I read them, a cold chill ran down my spine. They were too specific, too personal. The first one was short, just a few words. "You think it's over?" It was signed simply, C. I tried to brush it off as a prank, some sick joke, but the emails kept coming. They grew more detailed, referencing things only someone deeply involved in the investigation would know. Details about the diary, about David and Johnson, about me. I reported the emails to the police, but there was little they could do. The addresses were untraceable, and whoever was sending them knew how to cover their tracks. The messages became more threatening, more personal. It was clear that whoever C was, they wanted me to know that the nightmare wasn't over. One night, as I sat in my living room, scrolling through the latest email, my phone rang. The number was blocked. My hand shook as I answered. "Hello?" A distorted voice crackled through the line. "You've opened a door, and now it can't be closed." "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "You know who I am. You thought you could just walk away, but it's not that simple. There are more of us, and we're watching you." The line went dead, leaving me in stunned silence. Panic surged through me, and I checked every lock in the house, drew every curtain. I felt exposed, hunted. Whoever this was, they knew too much. The next day, I took all the evidence I had left and brought it to the police again. They took it seriously, assigning an officer to watch my house and patrol my neighborhood. But even with the police presence, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I started noticing strange things. A car parked down the street for hours, a figure standing in the shadows across the road at night, the feeling of being followed when I left the house. My paranoia grew, consuming every aspect of my life. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't enjoy the things I used to love. Every moment was tainted by fear. Then one night, I heard a noise in the backyard. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed and crept to the window. In the dim light, I saw a figure moving near the back fence. My heart pounded as I slowly opened the back door, stepping out into the cool night air. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. The figure stepped into the light, and I saw a familiar face. It was David. He shouldn't have been there. He was supposed to be in jail. I felt a surge of terror and disbelief. How did you get out?" He smiled, a cold, sinister smile that sent chills down my spine. "You really thought it was over? There are more of us than you know. We have friends, connections. You've only scratched the surface." Before I could react, he lunged at me. I swung the bat, catching him in the side, but he was strong, fueled by some twisted rage. We struggled, and I managed to knock him back, scrambling to get back inside the house. I slammed the door and locked it, my heart racing. I called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. They arrived within minutes, but by then, David was gone. They searched the area, but found nothing. The officer assigned to watch my house had seen nothing, heard nothing. It was like David had vanished into thin air. The police assured me They'd increased their patrols, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They thought I was losing it, that the stress and fear were getting to me. Maybe they were right. I didn't know what was real anymore. The emails continued, taunting me, reminding me that I was never truly safe. "We're always watching," one said. "You can't escape us," read another. The messages were signed with different initials. B, R, J, a different one each time, but the threat was always the same. I became a prisoner in my own home, afraid to leave, afraid to stay. The world outside felt hostile, full of unseen enemies. Every shadow, every stranger seemed like a threat. My life had become a waking nightmare, one I couldn't escape. And then, one night, I heard a knock at the door. It was late, well past midnight. My heart pounded as I crept to the door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. Another knock, louder this time. I backed away, grabbing the bat again, my hands slick with sweat. "Who's there?" I called, my voice barely a whisper. Silence, then a voice low and cold from the other side of the door. "You can't hide forever." I stumbled back, my heart racing. The knocking continued, relentless, each one a hammer blow to my frayed nerves. I didn't know what to do, where to go. I felt trapped, a hunted, a rabbit in a snare. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had started. I stood there, bat in hand, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I waited, minutes ticking by like hours, but there was nothing, no sound, no movement. In the morning, I found a note slipped under the door. It was a single piece of paper, the words scrawled in a messy, hurried hand. "This isn't over. We'll always be watching." I knew then that my life would never be the same. The darkness I'd uncovered had taken root, spreading its tendrils into every aspect of my existence. I had opened a door, and there was no closing it. I'm telling you this now, not because I think it will save me, but because I need someone to know the truth. There are monsters out there, hiding in plain sight, and they're always watching, always waiting. Life had become a never-ending cycle of fear and paranoia. I barely slept, and when I did, my dreams were filled with faceless figures watching me from the shadows. I kept the police updated on every email, every strange occurrence, but it felt like I was fighting an invisible enemy. David's escape and the continued threats left me in a constant state of dread. Days turned into weeks, and then one day, the email stopped. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a temporary reprieve, but days passed with no new messages, no threats, no signs of David or his associates. I wanted to believe it was over, that somehow they had decided to leave me alone. But deep down, I knew better. I became hyper-vigilant, never letting my guard down. I barely left the house except for essentials, and even then, I felt eyes on me everywhere I went. The police kept up their patrols, but their presence was little comfort. The damage had been done. My life was shattered, and the pieces were scattered too far to ever put back together. Then one night, I got another call. The number was blocked again, and my heart sank as I answered it. "You think you're safe now?" The distorted voice on the other end was familiar, filled with malice. "This is just the beginning. We're everywhere. Who are you? What do you want?" I shouted, anger and fear bubbling up inside me. "We want you to suffer, just like they did." The line went dead, leaving me shaking with a mix of rage and terror. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I had to do something, anything, to take back control of my life. I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts, planning my next move. I decided to reach out to a few investigative journalists, hoping they might be able to help expose the network of killers I'd uncovered. If the police couldn't stop them, maybe public exposure would. I met with the journalists in secret, providing them with all the evidence I had. They were shocked by what I told them, but they promised to dig deeper, to bring the story to light. It was a small glimmer of hope, a chance that maybe, just maybe, the truth would set me free. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, I came home to find my front door ajar. I froze, fear gripping me. I had been so careful, always locking the doors, always checking the windows. Slowly, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was eerily silent, every creak of the floorboards echoing in the stillness. As I moved through the house, my heart pounded. Nothing seemed out of place, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I reached the living room and stopped dead in my tracks. There, on the coffee table, was a single sheet of paper. It was a note, written in the same messy hand as the last one. "We're closer than you think." I felt a rush of cold fear. They had been in my house. They could have been anywhere watching me. I ran to my bedroom, grabbing the small handgun I had bought for protection, and called the police. They arrived quickly, searching the house and the surrounding area, but found no one. Once again, I was left feeling exposed and vulnerable. The police decided to put me into protective custody. They moved me to a safe house, an unassuming apartment in a different part of town. I was grateful for the security, but the sense of dread never left me. Every knock on the door, every phone call sent my heart racing. I tried to keep myself busy, but the isolation and fear were suffocating. The journalists I had contacted were working on the story, but it would take time. Meanwhile, I was living in a state of constant fear, waiting for the next shoe to drop. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Look outside." I jumped up, heart pounding, and moved to the window. I peered through the blinds and saw a car parked across the street. It was too dark to see who was inside, but I knew it wasn't a coincidence. I called the police again, and they sent a patrol car to check it out. The officers approached the car cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They knocked on the window, and after a tense moment, the door opened. A man was pulled out, struggling, shouting something I couldn't hear. The officers cuffed him and brought him over to their car. I watched, my breath held as they drove away. A few minutes later, one of the officers came to my door. "We got him," he said. "He was watching your house. We're taking him in for questioning." I felt a small measure of relief, but the officer's next words chilled me to the bone. "He had this on him." He handed me a small crumpled piece of paper. It was another note, written in that same familiar hand. "You can't hide forever." The next few days were a blur. The police questioned the man, but he refused to talk. They increased security around the safe house, but the sense of impending doom never left me. The journalists finally published their story, exposing the network of killers and their gruesome crimes. It was a national sensation, sparking outrage and horror across the country. The exposure brought some arrests, but the leaders of the network remained elusive. The threats continued, but the police presence around me was a constant deterrent. Slowly, the intensity of the harassment lessened. The network had been dealt a significant blow, and they were retreating into the shadows, at least for the time being. I knew I would never truly be free from the fear. The knowledge of what I'd uncovered, the horrors I'd seen, would stay with me forever. But I also knew I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let them control my life. I decided to move away, to start fresh in a new place with a new identity. It was the only way I could hope to find some peace. The police helped with the arrangements, and within a few months, I was living in a small town halfway across the country, far from the memories of the past. Life slowly began to return to something resembling normal. I made new friends, found a new job, and tried to build a new life. The nightmares still haunted me, and the shadows still seemed a little darker, but I was determined to move forward. I don't know if I'll ever truly escape the darkness I uncovered. It's a part of me now, a scar that will never fully heal. But I've learned to live with it, to keep moving forward, one day at a time. If you're reading this, remember, the world is full of hidden horrors, monsters lurking in the shadows. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never forget that sometimes curiosity can open doors that should have stayed closed.